widow with 6 children was expelled from town for being cursed. Lone Apache made her his family safe. The town stood where the dry plains met a line of dusty hills, a place built by people who believed hard work and strong faith could turn wild land into home. Wooden buildings leaned slightly from years of wind, and the streets carried the sounds of wagons, horses, and quiet conversations. Most people knew each other by name, and outsiders were always noticed. One late afternoon, a woman walked toward the town with 6 children following closely behind her. Their clothes were worn from travel, their steps slow but determined. The woman's face showed both strength and deep tiredness. She had lost her husband months earlier during a harsh journey west, and since then she had carried the weight of survival alone. Her children ranged in age from a small boy who struggled to keep up to a young girl who helped guide the younger ones with gentle patience. People paused to watch them. Some felt sympathy, but many felt cautious. Life on the frontier was already difficult, and new mouths to feed often meant new problems. The widow stopped near the general store, gathering her children around her like a shield. She spoke politely to the store owner, asking if there was work she could do in exchange for food. Her voice was calm, respectful, and steady despite the long road behind her. At first, the town responded with cautious kindness. A farmer allowed her to stay in an empty shed for a few nights. Another woman offered old blankets. The children received small pieces of bread from curious neighbors who watched from doorways. For a moment, it seemed possible that the town might accept them. The widow worked harder than anyone expected. She washed clothes by hand, repaired torn garments, and helped cook meals for families who needed extra hands. Her children followed her example, helping wherever they could. The oldest carried water buckets without complaint, while the younger ones gathered firewood or cleaned small spaces. Slowly, people began to notice their effort. But frontier towns were fragile places. Fear often spread faster than understanding. A sickness passed through the livestock that season, leaving several farmers worried about their future. Then a sudden storm destroyed part of a wheat field just before harvest. Soon after, a barn caught fire during the night, leaving behind only smoke and ash. None of these events were truly connected, but in difficult times people searched for reasons, and sometimes they chose the easiest explanation instead of the truth. Whispers began quietly. Some said the widow arrived just before the trouble started. Others noticed how she kept to herself, speaking little about her past. A few claimed her silence felt strange. Bold stories about bad luck and unseen forces surfaced in conversations at the saloon and near the well where women gathered to talk. Fear grew slowly, almost unnoticed at first. The widow sensed the change before anyone spoke directly to her. People stopped smiling when she passed. The store owner hesitated before giving her credit for supplies. Children who once played near her own began to stay away, pulled back by worried parents. She continued working without complaint, hoping her actions would speak louder than rumors. Her children felt the difference too. The older girl noticed how other children stared at them but did not come close. One boy returned home one evening with tears in his eyes, after someone called his family unlucky. The widow comforted him gently, reminding him that people sometimes feared what they did not understand. Days turned into weeks, and the town grew colder toward them. One morning, the widow arrived at a house where she usually worked, only to find the door closed and no answer to her knocking. Another employer told her they no longer needed help. Even the farmer who had first offered shelter seemed uneasy, avoiding long conversations. Despite everything, she refused to show anger. She believed that patience and kindness might change the town's opinion. Each evening she gathered her children together, speaking softly about hope and courage. She encouraged them to stay respectful no matter how others treated them. Yet fear continued to grow among the townspeople. A child fell ill, and someone claimed they had seen the widow nearby earlier that day. Another accident happened when a wagon broke an axle on the main road, and again whispers connected the misfortune to her presence. These stories grew larger each time they were told, changing slightly with every retelling, until they felt like facts to those who wanted to believe them. The widow became more isolated. She walked with her head held high, but felt the weight of judgment pressing against her. Nights grew longer as she wondered whether she had made a mistake bringing her children here. Still, she held on to hope, believing that truth would eventually replace fear. One evening a town meeting was called. The widow was not invited, but she sensed something important was happening. From a distance, she watched lantern light glow inside the main hall, while voices rose and fell behind closed doors. Her children stayed close to her, sensing her worry even though she tried to remain calm. Inside the meeting, opinions were divided. Some argued that blaming the widow was unfair, pointing out that hard times came to every settlement. Others insisted that removing her family might restore peace. Fear made people speak more loudly than reason. The decision came quickly once the louder voices took control. The next morning, 2 men approached the shed where the widow and her children stayed. Their expressions were serious, but not cruel. They explained that the town had decided it would be better if she moved on. They avoided harsh words, yet the meaning was clear. She and her children were no longer welcome. The widow listened quietly. She did not argue or plead. Instead, she thanked them for the time they had allowed her family to stay. Her calm response surprised the men, who had expected anger or tears. After they left, she turned to her children. Some were confused, others frightened. She knelt beside them and spoke gently, explaining that sometimes people made decisions based on fear, and that their family would continue forward together no matter what. They packed their few belongings carefully. The children worked together folding blankets and gathering tools. As they walked through the town one last time, some people watched from windows, unable to meet her eyes. A few faces showed regret, but no one spoke. The road leading away from the town stretched long and empty. The wind carried dust across their path as they walked into uncertainty. The widow held the youngest child's hand while guiding the others forward, step by step. Behind them, the town returned to its routine, but a quiet silence lingered where compassion might have been. Ahead lay the unknown wilderness, filled with both danger and possibility. The widow did not know what awaited her family, but she knew one truth clearly. As long as they stayed together, they would continue moving forward, even when the world turned away from them. The road away from the town stretched into open land that felt endless. Dust rose beneath their feet with every step, and the sound of the wind replaced the noise of people and wagons they had left behind. The widow walked at the front, her shoulders straight even though her body felt heavy with exhaustion. The children followed closely, each carrying something small, a blanket, a cooking pot, or a bundle of clothing. They did not complain, but their silence showed how tired they were. The youngest child stumbled often, and the older sister helped him keep pace. The widow watched them carefully, counting their steps, making sure no one fell too far behind. She tried to choose paths that offered shade, but the landscape did not always allow it. Some days were hot and bright, while nights brought cold air that made sleep difficult. Food became their greatest concern. The small supplies they had carried from town disappeared quickly. The widow rationed every bite carefully, making sure the children ate before she did. She gathered wild plants when she could recognize them, and searched for water sources guided by faint trails left by animals. Every decision mattered, because mistakes could cost them dearly. Despite hardship, the children showed quiet strength. The older boy tried to act brave, pretending he was not hungry, so his younger siblings would not worry. The little ones stayed close together, sharing stories to distract themselves from fear. At night, they gathered around a small fire when possible, listening as their mother spoke about better days ahead. The wilderness felt both beautiful and unforgiving. Tall grasses moved like waves under the wind, and distant mountains stood like silent watchers. Birds crossed the sky, and sometimes deer appeared briefly before disappearing again. The widow noticed everything, searching for signs that could guide them safely. One evening, as the sun lowered behind the hills, she felt a strange sensation, the feeling of being watched. She stopped walking and listened carefully. The land seemed quiet, yet something in her instincts told her they were not alone. She told the children to stay close without showing fear. Unknown to them, a lone Apache man had been observing from a distance for some time. He had noticed the unusual sight of a woman traveling alone with 6 children through land where survival required skill and experience. He did not approach immediately, unsure whether they would react with fear or hostility. The widow sensed movement near a cluster of rocks. Her heart beat faster, but she forced herself to remain calm. She knew panic would only frighten the children. When the figure finally stepped into view, she saw a man dressed simply, carrying himself with quiet confidence. His presence was strong but not threatening. The children froze, unsure how to react. The widow stood between them and the stranger, her protective instinct guiding her. For a moment, no one spoke. The wind moved gently around them, carrying the tension between two worlds that had often misunderstood each other. The Apache man observed their condition carefully. He noticed the tired faces of the children, the empty look of their supply bags, and the determination in the widow's posture. Instead of approaching too closely, he stopped at a respectful distance and lowered his gaze slightly to show peaceful intent. Communication began slowly. He spoke a few words in a language she did not fully understand, then tried simple gestures. He pointed toward the children and then toward a nearby direction, as if offering guidance. The widow hesitated. She had grown up hearing stories that warned against trusting strangers, especially those who lived differently from her own people. Yet the reality before her challenged those old fears. Hunger and exhaustion made the choice clear. She nodded cautiously. The Apache led them toward a hidden path that curved along the side of a hill. After some time, they reached a small camp protected by natural rocks and trees. Smoke from a small fire drifted gently into the air. It was simple but carefully arranged, showing knowledge of the land. He offered food without hesitation. The children watched carefully before accepting, but their hunger soon overcame their uncertainty. The widow thanked him quietly, feeling both relief and humility. She realized that the person she had been taught to fear was now the one helping them survive. That first night felt strange, but safe. The Apache kept a respectful distance, allowing them space to rest. The children fell asleep quickly, their bodies finally able to relax after days of constant movement. The widow remained awake longer, watching the stars and thinking about how quickly life could change.
In the following days, trust grew slowly.
Communication remained simple, using gestures and shared actions more than words. The Apache showed them where to find clean water and taught the older children how to recognize safe plants. He moved with quiet patience, never forcing conversation or demanding gratitude. The children began to feel less afraid. They noticed how he listened carefully before acting, how he moved silently through the land as if part of it. One afternoon, he showed them how to set a simple trap for small animals, guiding their hands with calm confidence. Their laughter returned little by little, carried by moments of success and discovery. The widow watched these interactions with mixed emotions. Part of her felt deep gratitude while another part remained cautious. She knew trust took time, especially after being rejected by others. Yet she could not deny the kindness she witnessed each day. As evenings passed, she noticed signs that the Apache man had lived alone for a long time. His camp was organized but quiet, lacking the warmth of family life. Sometimes she caught a glimpse of sadness in his eyes when he watched the children play. Though he spoke little about himself, it became clear that he understood loss as deeply as she did. One afternoon, a sudden storm rolled across the land, bringing strong wind and heavy rain. The Apache guided them quickly to secure shelter, showing skill born from experience. Together, they protected the camp and kept the fire alive. During that storm, the widow realized how different their fate might have been if they had continued alone. After the storm passed, the air felt fresh and calm. The children gathered around him, asking questions through gestures and simple words. He responded patiently, drawing shapes in the dirt to explain ideas. The language barrier slowly faded as understanding grew. The widow felt something shift inside her. A recognition that family could be formed not only by blood, but by shared survival and kindness. The fear that once filled her began to fade, replaced by cautious hope. Though uncertainty remained, she sensed that their journey had changed direction. What began as desperation had led them to unexpected help. The wilderness no longer felt like an enemy, but like a place where new beginnings could grow. As night fell once again, the widow sat near the fire, watching her children sleep peacefully. The Apache sat across from her, silent but present. Neither spoke, yet understanding passed between them. They were two people shaped by loss, brought together by chance and compassion. For the first time since leaving the town, the widow allowed herself to believe that survival might turn into something more, a chance to rebuild life in a way she had never imagined before. The days that followed brought a rhythm of life the widow had never known before. Each morning began with the sun slowly rising over the hills, spreading light across the grasses and trees. The widow and her children woke early, often before the Apache man, who was already moving quietly through the camp, checking the surrounding land and making sure everything was safe. The air was crisp and filled with the sounds of birds, rustling leaves, and the soft trickle of nearby streams. The widow noticed how peaceful it felt to wake in a place that offered safety, a sharp contrast to the fear and rejection of the town they had left behind. Food remained the most pressing concern. The Apache showed them which plants were edible and which ones could make a safe drink when water was scarce. He taught the children to recognize shapes of leaves and to feel the textures of roots, always stressing caution. The oldest boy learned quickly, pointing out edible plants to the younger ones and helping them avoid dangerous mistakes. The widow guided her children to be patient and observant, showing them how survival often depended on attention to small details. She encouraged them to ask questions and to remember everything they learned, because knowledge could save their lives in moments of need. Every evening, when the work of the day was done, the family gathered near the fire. The children would laugh softly as the widow told stories about the life they had left behind and about the dreams they could still pursue. Sometimes they created little games to pass the time, using sticks to draw shapes in the dirt or racing along the edge of the clearing. Even the Apache man joined in small ways, teaching the children how to read animal tracks or how to move silently through the trees. Though he rarely spoke much, his presence was comforting. The children began to see him as a guide and protector, someone who understood the world in ways they were just beginning to learn. The widow found moments to talk to the Apache alone. They did not speak much about the past at first, but she shared small details about her life and the struggles she had faced. He listened carefully, nodding in understanding, sometimes offering advice or a simple word of reassurance. She realized that while he had lived alone for many years, he was not indifferent to companionship. His eyes occasionally held a distant sadness, a hint of past loss, and she understood that their meeting was not simply a chance encounter, but perhaps a turning point for both of them. Days turned into weeks, and the children grew stronger, more confident, and more capable. The youngest, once weak and timid, learned to carry small loads and follow instructions carefully. The middle children became skilled at gathering food, starting small fires, and helping each other in moments of difficulty. Their oldest sister took on responsibilities with a quiet dignity, assisting her mother in guiding the younger children without complaint. The widow watched all of them with pride, feeling a warmth she had not known in months. She understood that the hardship they had faced had built resilience in her children, and that their strength was a gift that could never be taken away. The Apache taught more than survival skills. He introduced lessons about respect for nature and the balance of life around them. He explained how every plant, animal, and even the weather had a role to play in keeping the land healthy. The children listened with fascination, learning that life depended not only on effort, but also on understanding. They began to notice the patterns of the land, how the seasons changed, and how small actions could affect the world around them. The widow absorbed these lessons as well, realizing that their life in the wilderness was a teacher of patience, observation, and careful decision-making. Despite the stability of the new life, challenges still arose. One afternoon while gathering firewood, the oldest boy tripped over a hidden root and scraped his knee deeply. The widow rushed to help, washing the wound with clean water and applying a bandage with care. The Apache watched, offering instructions and tips for preventing infection. It was a moment of both fear and learning. The children understood that injuries and setbacks could happen at any time, and that how they responded to them mattered. The widow comforted her children, teaching them calmness and care, lessons that would remain with them long after the pain had healed. As the season shifted, the wilderness began to feel like home. Spring brought fresh grass, new plants, and the return of small animals. The children learned to identify new foods, to observe bird behaviors, and to find safe places to rest during storms. The Apache showed them how to create simple shelters that could withstand rain and wind, and the widow assisted in making the structures secure. Together they worked as a team, each member contributing according to their ability. The children began to call the Apache family in small ways, offering a smile or gesture that showed their growing affection and trust. The widow herself grew stronger and more confident. She could walk for hours through rough terrain without fatigue, and could identify safe plants and water sources almost instinctively. She taught the children the importance of teamwork, patience, and perseverance. She also taught them to be kind to the land, to leave things as they found them, and to respect the animals and plants that shared their space. Her children began to mirror her behavior, showing compassion and thoughtfulness in ways that surprised even her. The Apache man began to open up in small ways. Though he rarely shared stories of his past, he revealed pieces of himself through actions and careful instruction. He demonstrated how to create tools from natural materials, how to set simple traps without causing unnecessary harm, and how to move quietly through the forest to avoid startling animals. He taught them to listen to the wind and the rustling leaves, to recognize distant sounds that could indicate danger, and to respond with calm and measured actions. Through these lessons, the children learned the power of observation, patience, and quiet courage. Over time, the widow and the Apache developed a strong bond. They shared responsibilities and decisions about the camp, each respecting the other's knowledge and experience. They celebrated small successes together, a day when the children gathered enough food, a repaired shelter after a storm, or a safe night spent under the stars. These moments build trust and mutual respect, allowing the widow to feel supported and less alone in her journey. The children also began to flourish socially and emotionally. Their laughter returned more freely, echoing through the trees as they played and explored. They learned to rely on one another, to share resources, and to help those who needed assistance. The youngest child began to mimic the Apache's careful movements, learning to observe and act with patience. The middle children became more independent, taking pride in completing small tasks on their own. The oldest sister developed leadership skills, coordinating efforts and guiding her siblings when their mother was busy or occupied. Life remained challenging, but the family had learned to adapt. They faced hunger, weather, and occasional injuries with determination and teamwork. Each challenge strengthened their bond and deepened their understanding of the world. The widow felt hope growing steadily inside her, a hope that had been nearly extinguished in the town that rejected them. Here, in the wilderness, surrounded by nature and the guidance of the Apache, they discovered a sense of belonging and purpose that had seemed impossible just weeks earlier. One evening, the family sat together around a small fire, the orange flames dancing against the night sky. The widow looked at her children, their faces lit with curiosity and joy, and then at the Apache man, who watched them silently with a protective gaze. She realized that family was not only defined by blood but by care, trust, and shared experience. The children had begun to see him as a father figure, and she had begun to see him as a companion in the struggle of life. Though no words were needed, a quiet understanding passed among them. They had found safety, guidance, and the possibility of a new life. As the night deepened, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the sound of the wilderness alive with movement. The children fell asleep one by one, their bodies relaxed and their minds filled with curiosity for the next day. The widow stayed awake longer, reflecting on how much had changed in such a short time. From the despair of being cast out to the cautious hope of new beginnings, they had walked a journey that tested every ounce of their courage. The Apache man continued to sit nearby, alert yet calm, as if standing watch over the fragile beginnings of trust and family. He had once been alone, navigating a world that often judged him without understanding. Now, he had a role that mattered, a connection that gave him purpose. The widow understood that their meeting had not been accidental. It was a meeting of necessity, timing, and fate.
In the weeks that followed, the family continued to grow in strength and confidence.
The children learned more about the land and about each other. The widow found peace in small routines, and the Apache taught them resilience in subtle ways. Together they began to weave a life that, though still filled with uncertainty, offered safety, learning, and the first glimmers of hope for the future. The wilderness, once frightening and unknown, became a place of lessons, discovery, and care. Each day brought small triumphs and moments of beauty. Through patience, understanding, and shared effort, the widow and her children began to see that survival was more than staying alive. It was building a life worth living, even in the face of hardship. And so, the family continued, step by step, learning the strength of their unity and the quiet power of trust, slowly shaping a home where each of them belonged. The family had settled into a rhythm that brought a sense of calm and purpose to each day. The widow awoke with the sun stretching her tired muscles and preparing for the work ahead. The children had grown stronger, their movements more confident and deliberate. The Apache man moved silently through the camp, checking water sources and scanning the surrounding land for signs of danger. Life, though still challenging, had become predictable in ways that gave the widow a small sense of relief she had not felt in months. The seasons were changing. Spring had brought green shoots across the hills, wildflowers in vibrant colors, and the return of small animals that had been scarce during the cold months. The widow taught her children to recognize the new plants and flowers, pointing out which ones could be used for food and which ones could help treat minor injuries. The Apache man guided them carefully, showing the children how to gather and prepare what they needed without disturbing the balance of the land. Each lesson was a mix of survival and understanding, teaching them not only how to live, but how to respect the wilderness that surrounded them. The children were growing in skill and confidence. The youngest, once hesitant and weak, now followed trails through the forest and helped gather small pieces of wood for the fire. The middle children had learned how to track animals and recognize signs of danger, practicing quietly under the guidance of the Apache. The oldest daughter had become nearly as skilled as her mother in teaching the younger ones, and she began to take on leadership responsibilities within the small family. The widow felt proud watching them, knowing that their resilience was a result of hardship, patience, and learning. Despite the stability, challenges continued to arise. One afternoon, while checking a trap set for small game, the oldest boy discovered that it had been disturbed, leaving only the signs of a fox. He ran back to the camp to report it, fear and disappointment on his face. The widow remained calm, teaching him to observe carefully and understand what had happened. The Apache man explained that setbacks were a natural part of life, and that patience and persistence were more important than immediate success. Together, they reset the traps and discussed ways to be more cautious in the future. The children absorbed these lessons slowly, understanding that success in the wilderness required observation, patience, and careful thinking. Occasionally, travelers passed nearby, and the widow felt a mixture of caution and curiosity. Some stopped to ask for directions or information, but most continued on their way, unaware of the small family living quietly in the forest. The widow preferred it that way, knowing that too much attention could bring danger or judgment. The Apache man had warned her that not everyone who approached would be kind, and she had learned to trust her instincts about people. The family continued to live quietly, focusing on their survival and growth. Food remained an ongoing concern. While the land offered many resources, it required knowledge and careful work to provide enough for 6 growing children. The Apache taught the children to identify edible plants, to follow the trails of small animals, and to fish in the streams with patience and skill. The widow prepared meals carefully, making sure that each child had enough to eat. She taught them how to stretch small portions, how to combine plants and grains to create nourishment, and how to make the most of what the land provided. The children learned to respect their food and the effort it took to acquire it, understanding that survival depended on both knowledge and discipline. One morning, the family faced an unexpected challenge when a sudden storm rolled through the area. The wind howled through the trees and rain poured down in heavy sheets. The children huddled close together, frightened by the noise and the flashes of lightning. The widow and the Apache man worked together to secure the camp, moving supplies and reinforcing the shelters. They guided the children calmly, showing them how to remain safe and quiet. The storm lasted for hours, testing their skills and resilience. When it finally passed, the family emerged soaked but unharmed, having learned the importance of preparation, teamwork, and remaining calm in the face of danger. The bond between the widow and the Apache man continued to grow. They relied on each other for advice, support, and protection. He respected her strength, patience, and intelligence, and she admired his knowledge of the land and his careful, deliberate ways. Though they rarely spoke about their pasts, each shared small glimpses of themselves through actions and decisions. They developed a quiet understanding, knowing that their connection was built on trust, respect, and the shared responsibility of keeping the children safe. The children also began to see the Apache as part of their family. At first, they had been cautious, unsure whether to trust him completely. Over time, his patient guidance, small acts of kindness, and willingness to teach them everything they needed to know helped them see him as a protector and a mentor. They began to call him family in small ways, offering smiles, gestures, and quiet words of appreciation. The widow noticed the change, feeling a warmth in her heart she had not felt in a long time. As weeks turned into months, the family learned more about each other and themselves. The children discovered strengths they had not known existed, from problem-solving skills to physical endurance. The widow grew more confident in her ability to provide, guide, and protect. The Apache man developed a sense of belonging he had not felt in years, realizing that his life had meaning beyond survival. Together, they formed a unit that relied on trust, patience, and shared effort. One evening, after a day of gathering food and checking traps, the family sat around the fire. The children laughed softly as they recounted small victories, such as successfully catching a fish or finding a new edible plant. The widow smiled, feeling a sense of peace she had never known in the town that rejected her. The Apache man watched quietly, a faint smile appearing as he observed the family's growing bond. In that moment, it was clear that they had created a new kind of home, one built on care, learning, and trust. The wilderness, once frightening and unknown, had become a place of lessons, discovery, and quiet beauty. The family had learned to read the signs of the land, to respect its rhythms, and to work together to thrive within it. Each challenge they faced strengthened their connection and understanding, teaching them resilience, patience, and the value of cooperation. The widow realized that life in the wilderness was not simply about survival. It was about building a future, no matter how uncertain it might be. As the nights grew longer and the children slept under the protective watch of the Apache man, the widow remained awake, reflecting on how far they had come. From the fear and rejection of the town to the cautious hope of life in the wilderness, they had walked a path that tested every part of them. They had faced hunger, weather, and exhaustion, yet they had found strength in each other. The widow understood that family could be formed not only by blood but by trust, care, and shared experience. Through patient guidance, shared effort, and respect for each other and the land, the family had begun to thrive. The children laughed, learned, and grew stronger. The widow felt a sense of accomplishment in watching them discover their own skills and abilities. The Apache man, once alone, now had a role in shaping the next generation, offering guidance and protection. Together they had created a life that, while still challenging, offered hope, security, and a sense of belonging. The lessons of the wilderness extended beyond survival. The widow taught the children kindness, patience, and empathy. The Apache man showed them respect, careful observation, and the importance of understanding the world around them. Together they learned that family was more than shared blood. It was the bonds formed through shared hardship, care, and trust. As the season changed once more, bringing new growth to the hills and streams, the family continued to adapt and thrive. They faced obstacles with determination and met challenges with patience. Every small victory, a full meal, a safe night, or a day without accidents, reinforced their sense of capability and resilience. The widow knew that the road ahead would still hold difficulties, but she also knew that together they could overcome anything. In the quiet moments around the fire, the children rested safely under the watchful eyes of both their mother and the Apache man. The widow felt a deep sense of gratitude for the unexpected turn of events that had brought them here. From the fear and prejudice of the town to the calm and care of the wilderness, they had discovered a new life. It was a life built not on judgment or superstition, but on trust, patience, and love. Through hardship, teaching, and shared effort, the family had created a home in the wilderness, a home where each member mattered, each voice was heard, and each day offered opportunities for learning and growth. The widow understood that survival was more than staying alive. It was about creating a life that offered hope, safety, and belonging. And for the first time in months, she felt the quiet assurance that her family had found both. The family had grown together, learning from each other and from the land. The children developed confidence and skill. The widow gained strength and hope. The Apache man, once alone, discovered the meaning of connection and responsibility. Together they faced challenges, celebrated victories, and built a life that, though still difficult, was full of promise. The wilderness, once a place of fear and uncertainty, had become a home filled with care, learning, and quiet joy. And as the fire dimmed each night and the stars appeared above the hills, the family slept safely, knowing that they were stronger together than they could ever be alone. The widow watched them, feeling pride, love, and hope for the future, knowing that even in the wildest and most uncertain places, family could be found and life could flourish. The seasons continued to change, and with them came new challenges, new lessons, and a growing sense of stability for the widow, her children, and the Apache man. The land that had once seemed harsh and unwelcoming had become a teacher, a protector, and a place where life could grow. The children moved through it with confidence, learning to observe the smallest signs in the grasses, the trees, and even the wind. They had learned to recognize the tracks of animals, to identify safe plants, and to know the difference between a shadow and a threat. The wilderness, once a place of fear, had become a school for survival and understanding, and the family thrived within it. The widow felt a sense of pride each morning as she watched her children wake. They had grown not just stronger in body but also in spirit. Their laughter returned fully, carrying through the trees and hills like a song of resilience. The oldest daughter had taken on the role of a little teacher herself, guiding the younger children through daily chores and helping them remember the lessons their mother and the Apache man had taught. The boys ran along the trails, checking traps, gathering water, and carrying supplies with energy that spoke of their growing strength. Each day was a test of patience, skill, and courage, and each day they succeeded more than they failed. And food, which had once been a source of worry, became a symbol of their resilience. The Apache man taught the children more advanced skills: how to fish with patience and careful observation, how to set traps that did not harm unnecessarily, and how to gather and store edible plants for times when food might be scarce. The widow prepared meals carefully, using the lessons she had learned from both the Apache and her own experience. She taught the children to value each bite, to share what they had, and to understand that their survival depended on respect for the land and the work it required. Mealtime became a moment of learning, laughter, and reflection, where each child understood the value of effort and care. Occasionally travelers passed nearby, wandering through the land with questions, curiosity, or need. Some stayed for a short time, receiving quiet guidance from the widow or the Apache man. Others simply passed by, unaware of the small family that thrived in the wilderness. The widow felt no need for recognition or approval. The survival and growth of her family were all the acknowledgement she required. The Apache man, too, appreciated the quiet life, knowing that too much attention from the outside world could bring danger or distraction. Together they had created a bubble of safety and learning, where the children could grow without fear. One day the family faced a test that reminded them of the fragility of life. A young child became ill, showing signs of fever and weakness. The widow remained calm, tending to the child with careful attention, boiling water for cleanliness, and gathering medicinal plants that the Apache man had taught her to recognize. He helped as well, observing changes and guiding her hands when necessary. The other children stayed close, worried but reassured by the careful actions of their mother and protector. Through patience, observation, and the knowledge they had gained, the child recovered, and the family learned the importance of vigilance, care, and preparedness in the face of illness. Beyond the necessities of survival, the family began to explore the emotional richness of their new life. The children created small rituals, games, and routines that brought joy and creativity into their days. They found places to hide and explore, to play without fear, and to challenge themselves safely. The widow encouraged their imagination, helping them see the beauty in the world around them and the possibilities within it. The Apache man, though quiet, sometimes joined in these moments, teaching them about nature, tracking, and the patterns of the land. Through play and observation, the children strengthened not only their bodies but also their understanding of their surroundings and their ability to navigate the world.
The bond between the widow and the Apache man continued to deepen.
While they rarely spoke of the past, their actions conveyed trust, respect, and understanding. He helped her carry burdens, offered guidance when decisions were difficult, and respected her knowledge of the children and their needs. She relied on his experience and skill, knowing that together they could face challenges neither could meet alone. Their partnership was built not on romance, but on shared responsibility and mutual care, a steady foundation that allowed the family to grow stronger each day. As the children grew older, their skills became more refined. They learned to hunt small game, to identify subtle signs in the wind, and to move quietly and efficiently through the land. The eldest daughter took on even more responsibility, teaching the younger children patience and careful observation. The boys became adept at gathering water and maintaining the small camp. Each child contributed according to their abilities, creating a system that allowed the family to thrive despite the challenges of the wilderness. One evening, after a long day of work and learning, the family gathered around the fire. The children laughed quietly, recounting their successes, while the widow prepared a simple meal and the Apache man kept watch over the surroundings. The widow felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that her children had grown resilient, capable, and confident. The Apache man, too, felt a sense of purpose, seeing the results of his teaching and protection in the thriving children. For the first time since leaving the town, the widow felt a sense of true security, hope, and belonging. The wilderness continued to teach lessons that went beyond survival. The family learned patience, observation, cooperation, and respect. They learned that setbacks were temporary and that careful thinking could prevent many problems. They discovered that kindness, trust, and shared responsibility were as vital as food and shelter. Each day offered challenges, but also opportunities to grow, to learn, and to celebrate small victories. The widow understood that the life they were building was more than mere survival. It was a foundation for strength, love, and hope. Over time, the widow reflected on the journey that had brought them here. She thought of the town that had rejected them, of the fear and superstition that had forced her to leave, and of the uncertainty that had filled each step of their early journey. She realized that though those experiences had been painful, they had led her to the Apache man, to safety, and to a family that could grow stronger together. In this wilderness, she had found what the town could not offer: trust, respect, care, and a home built on understanding. The children thrived in this environment. They became confident, independent, and curious. They learned to solve problems, to care for each other, and to respect the land and its lessons. The youngest child, once timid and fearful, now ran along trails with excitement and confidence. The middle children became skilled in observing signs of animals, weather, and the environment. The oldest daughter grew into a natural leader, helping guide her siblings and supporting her mother in teaching and organizing daily life. Each child had found a sense of purpose, belonging, and capability within the family. The Apache man remained a steady guide, protector, and teacher. He had once lived alone, relying only on his own skills and knowledge. Now, he found meaning in guiding, teaching, and protecting a family. He took pride in their growth, and though he rarely spoke of his own past, his actions showed that he had found a new purpose. Through patience, wisdom, and quiet care, he helped create a home in the wilderness, a place where each member mattered and contributed to the family's success. The widow continued to teach her children lessons that would last a lifetime. She taught them courage, empathy, patience, and resilience. She emphasized the importance of observing the world carefully, understanding the consequences of actions, and helping others when possible. She showed them that kindness and understanding were as important as strength and skill. Through her guidance, the children learned that family and community could exist even in the most challenging environments. The family faced occasional dangers, but each challenge strengthened their bond. Storms, scarcity, and unexpected obstacles tested their skills and patience, yet they overcame each difficulty together. The widow taught the children to remain calm, to think clearly, and to act deliberately. The Apache man reinforced these lessons, adding his own knowledge and expertise. Through shared effort, observation, and care, they built a life that was safe, meaningful, and full of possibility. As years passed, the family grew even closer. The children matured into capable young individuals, each with skills and understanding that allowed them to thrive in the wilderness. The widow had regained her strength, confidence, and hope. The Apache man had found purpose and belonging. Together, they had built a home based on trust, patience, and care. The wilderness had become not only a place of survival but a place of growth, learning, and quiet joy. One evening, as the fire burned low and the stars appeared above the hills, the family gathered close together. The widow looked at her children, the Apache man, and the surrounding land. She realized that though the road ahead would still have challenges, they were stronger together than they had ever been alone. The lessons of the wilderness, the hardships they had endured, and the trust they had built would guide them through any difficulty. She felt pride, love, and hope. Hope that their life, though hard, was full of possibility and belonging. The children slept safely under the watchful eyes of both their mother and the Apache man. The widow sat quietly, reflecting on their journey from the town that had rejected them to the life they had built in the wilderness. She understood that family was more than blood. It was love, trust, care, and shared experience. The Apache man, once alone, now had a home and a purpose that gave him strength. Together they had created a life that allowed each member to grow, learn, and belong. Through patience, effort, and care, the family had found what many seek but few achieve: safety, connection, and a home built on understanding. The wilderness had become a teacher, a protector, and a place of opportunity. The widow, her children, and the Apache man had turned hardship into resilience, fear into trust, and uncertainty into hope. They had created a life where each day offered lessons, each challenge offered growth, and each member was valued. And as the night deepened, with the wind moving softly through the trees and the stars shining above, the family rested, secure in the knowledge that together they could face anything. Their journey had been long and difficult, but it had led them to a place of strength, love, and belonging. The widow understood that their greatest triumph was not simply surviving, but creating a life filled with hope, care, and the quiet power of family.